Each year, the local chapter of Sigma Theta Tau, the PiPi chapter, Blessing Hospital, and DRCN plan to have a clinical-based program for education for the student nurses and the nurses around the area. And it's co-sponsored by Blessing Hospital, PiPi, Truman State University, WIU, and we're really glad to have you all here. The reason that we do this is to provide free or reduced price education opportunity to the students and the employees of the area. So when you get a chance, say thank you to the organization that sponsored your scholarship to come. The restrooms are located just outside the main entrance of the auditorium, and also please dispose of the trash from your snacks in the waste receptacles. It's my pleasure to welcome our speaker today, Ann O'Sullivan. Ann is the Assistant Dean and Associate Professor at Blessing-Riemann College of Nursing here in Quincy. Ann has over 40 years experience as a nurse educator and a nurse administrator. At the national level, she's currently on the ANA Advisory Committee of the Professional Panel on the Workplace Violence and Incivility, and on the Steering Committee of the ANA Professional Panel on Barriers to Scope of Practice. She has served on the ANA Congress of Nursing Practice and Economics and several other ANA committees. Ann is currently Vice President of ANA Illinois and serving as the Chair of the Expert Panel on RN Scope of Practice. She serves as Chair of the IHAC Leadership Work Group and is a member of the IHAC Education Work Group. She was President of the Illinois Nurses Association from 1999 to 2001 and has served as President of the PiPi chapter of Sigma Theta Tau in the past also. So please help me welcome Ann O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Susan.
Get her rigged up.
Get geared up here today. Get everything in good place.
Lovely.
Thank you all. It's great to have you here. I know many of you made it in through the rain, not storming or snowing, so that's all good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I sometimes when they're reading that think, anyway. This is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, so I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share some information with you all and hopefully help you with any future issues or current issues that you may have related to workplace violence or incivility. Hi. No, I forgot. Amber's recording this and we're podcasting it, so those of you who know me, help me keep this on a professional level. Okay. I am at the tail end, I hope, of a cold and of a bad throat, so I'm very much hoping that we can make it through this last presentation with still having a voice and a throat that's working. How many of you have experienced verbal violence or incivility or bullying or whatever word, rude, disrespectful behavior? Raise your hands high. Look around the room. Is it prevalent? Yes. My mission here today is to help you be able to identify those behaviors, name them as such, and then have developed some strategies for doing something about it. I continue to be very saddened that 90+% of you raised your hand, but you will see that that is very much according to what the national standards are or what's being found out in other studies, which is still very sad that that's how it is, but there's no sense dealing in not reality. We may as well face it and do something about it. So our objectives here today are to look at some of the causes and effects of verbal violence and bullying, to look at some strategies for how to respond, and then hopefully leave you with some resources that you can take back to your places of work or schooling to try to do something about it. So it has many, many names. You will see it referred to in any of these kind of ways in the literature, in workplaces. There are policies out there, and I just wanted to make sure that we understand that no matter what we call it, it's the same thing. And that same thing is what these definitions are talking about. Bullying is officially defined as repetitive behavior. Now, we can all be bullies once in a while, and we'll talk about that, but it's basically repetitive behavior, harassment that involves intimidating behavior. Repeated, unwanted, psychological, physical, or sexual abuse or harassment. Horizontal or lateral violence is when it goes from peer to peer, student to student, or nurse to nurse, or one professional worker to another. And that's the abuse or aggression. Vertical violence is when it's going from a higher authority person to a person of lesser authority, like a teacher to a student, a boss to an employee, something like a parent to a child. Even though that may be called parenting. We won't go there. Okay, so that's what that is. Workplace incivility. The word incivility is a word that kind of related to this topic, originated in the educational journals and in the college kind of literature. And you're now seeing it across the board. And it really talks more about wide range of behaviors as disrespectful, rude, ugly, obnoxious, those kind of things that are uncivil towards each other. No matter what, all of this results in people physically, verbally, or emotionally abusing another person. And, we're talking about workplace, so that would be employee, but it's basically for another person. So we can see, just by that quick, non-scientific survey that I just took, that you all have seen that, experienced it, know it. Even if it hasn't been directed at you, if it's directed at the people around you, you still can very much suffer, wouldn't you agree, some of the physical or emotional trauma. Because why? Well, who knows when it's going to get to me? And, all that it does then to the people working together. So, we have people here from Blessing Raymond College of Nursing. Western, I've seen those, I love those purple shirts. They are fabulous. There are a whole bunch of you here last night. Do you guys have clinical here, or you came down especially for this, or both? This afternoon? Yep. So you're going to be here all day? Yep. Late into the evening, right?
I think so.
I think so. Well, I hope you have time to take a nap. Is the gentleman, is your teacher a guy, or?
Wherever you
Oh, hi. Well, yeah, I knew I recognized. Okay, good. So anyway, they were here last night, and hopefully you'll get some assistance out of it. So we have Blessing Raymond, we have Western. Do we have any Truman students here today? I know several were here last night, and I know we're podcasting and videotaping because they weren't all able to get in. The rooms yesterday were beyond packed. Be thankful you have a little bit of elbow room here today. There were 100+ people in each of the sessions yesterday, so we kind of had to cancel it. Then we have, do we have students from any place else? Our John Wood students here. And then we have nurses from Blessing, I know. Where else are nurses from in the area? All this?
This is all Western.
This is all Western.
Yep.
These are the seniors.
These are the seniors. Okay, yesterday they were juniors.
Well, some
So-
are juniors. The ones
Okay.
dressed in uniforms are juniors.
And they're coming here for clinical tonight, right? Yes, okay. And the rest of you just drove down because it was a nice day today. Okay, that's great. And then we have Blessing nurses. Any other nurses from any other place? Okay, so we have a wide representation of areas that may indeed be experiencing some of this. I just kind of like to see who's all in the audience. Definitions from the American Medical Association and ANA, I'll show you theirs in a minute. Whatever it is, however it's defined, creates a work environment that a reasonable person, are you guys all reasonable people? Well, yeah, I mean, who's going to say, no, I'm not reasonable, would find intimidating, threatening, violent, or abusive. Does that describe what you experienced when you raised your hand and said you've experienced some of this? Okay, so we're all talking about the same thing. Why would NIOSH? NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Why would they want to say anything about workplace violence and abuse? How does it affect the health of the people working in the environment if they are experiencing workplace violence, bullying, and civility?
They're compromised.
They're compromised. How are you, those of you who raised your hand or have seen it, how are you compromised? How is your health compromised if you're experiencing this?
Kind of a morale killer.
Kind of a morale killer.
Yeah.
The research shows that people working in toxic environments, these are toxic environments, experience much more days off due to illness, headaches, GI. Where do you put all this stress? Yeah. Inside. Isn't it stressful? Yeah. You put all that affects your physical health, let alone your emotional health. Do you feel like coming to work? What then happens to patient safety, employee and patient safety, if you're coming to work feeling that way? Or if you're working in an environment like that? Decreases. There is research out there that shows most definitely the quality of patient care suffers when you are working in an environment where workplace violence, incivility, bullying is going on. Tell me how that could be. Because I really want to establish that early on here, that patient care suffers.
Well, when I was a new nurse, I was told that I had to give an injection to someone who was paranoid, and he was paranoid, but he was refusing medication. And my head nurse decided that we were going to make him have his medication. And we went in, and he said, "You can't make me do that because I have rights." And I wouldn't do it.
Good for you.
Because he was, clearly he wasn't psychotic to the point that he didn't know what was going on. So I refused to do it. And she went out, complained to the psychiatrist who used to run things there, and he told her that, we couldn't make the patient take the medication, but the head nurse was angry at me. And I was it was hard to make decisions, decisions, because I was like, no, I'm going to be fired any minute.
Right.
It's my first job.
Exactly. So the fear of retaliation, would you likely have gone to the head nurse to ask a question for help?
No.
No. That's how it really affects patient care. If people are being violent against us, or verbally abusive, are you likely to go ask them for help? No. And then what's patient care likely to happen? What's likely to happen to patient care if you don't go ask for help when you need it? It could suffer. How about the same thing related to physicians? If they abuse you or yell at you, are you likely to call them with a changing patient condition? Now, should you? Of course. But we're all human beings. So do you see how this can affect patient care? So I want to make sure we're all very aware of that. Because the one thing we all have in common is concern for quality patient care. And so that's one thing that you're going to want to focus on when you talk to the person who is the bully or who is being abusive to you. And that's what we're going to work towards. Don't freak out and don't leave now. But that's really what we're going to work towards, is how do we stop this? How do we move forward? We have to be able to talk to the people about it. So prevalence, you've already seen that it's alive and well in our area. The literature shows anywhere from 30% to 86%, 89% of people they've surveyed, nurses or other, most of these are studies in the healthcare literature, have experienced verbal aggression, verbal violence. Look at the one that says 61%, oh, I keep forgetting this doesn't work, 61% nurse-to-nurse violence. Now again, we're not talking just about physical. We're talking about verbal, emotional. I'm going to quote this study several times today done by David Maxfield, who is out of the Vital Smarts company, who are the publishers and authors of all the work on Crucial Conversations. So many of you may be familiar with that. They've done quite a bit of work and research on this whole issue. David's most recent study is just last year. Study interviewed, surveyed 2,283 people, and 96% of the people he surveyed have experienced workplace violence, physical or emotional bullying or violence. That is pretty similar to the survey we just informally took here. His survey results are higher than a lot of the other ones because he specifically asked them about emotional, verbal, that kind of violence, not just physical violence. He was very clear in his survey so that people knew it meant all of that, not just punching somebody out or hitting somebody. And I would imagine that most of you, that's where you've experienced this kind of violence, sarcastic, cutting, disrespectful, silent treatment, those kind of things. It's important that we're able to name those as verbal abuse, bullying, those kind of things. Down at the bottom, only about 11% had actually experienced physical violence. In the group that I'm working on at A&A that Susan talked about in my introduction, is an A&A expert panel on workplace violence and incivility. So I've been able to participate in a good deal of the work that they're doing there. We're not allowed to share yet a lot of the work that we're doing or plans that we have until it's all finalized. But one thing that we did learn about was a study that the A&A did in 2014 where they surveyed 4,100 nurses and found that, the composition of the group was about half of them were staff nurses, then nurse managers and nurse educators. And what they found that in their questions, the question about what group is most prone to committing a violent act, it was primarily patients and families and friends. And I think that's where you see, the physical, just evidenced by the code purples that we have here or those kind of issues. But which group is most likely to exhibit incivility? Do you see the first one? I didn't just list that because I felt like it. RNs far outweighed in percentage of people that they reported were most likely to exhibit incivility all the other groups there. So, I know this is a downer, I know this is the bad news, but until we totally understand the situation that we're in, I don't think we're really going to be able to do anything about it. The most prevalent type of violence from the A&A study was worker on worker, then slightly less was patient on worker. This is the part that I find very distressing. Do I do something when I witness bullying or incivility behaviors? About 60% said sometimes. I will tell you that's a fairly high number. I don't know how often that means. Most of the other research, the Maxfield and Vital Smarts research shows only about 10 to 20% actually do something when they observe either to themselves or to others. About 40% said always. Again, I think that's a pretty high number. And then never 3%. My goal, and I hope all of our goals, would be to raise this up so that we are always intervening, always doing something when we observe or experience workplace violence. And hopefully you'll pick up some strategies here. What does it cost us? Why is this something that we really care about? Why is this something that it is imperative that we do something about? Do nurses want to stay in environments where there's workplace violence and bullying? Who would? Who's a glutton for punishment? So nurses leave at very high rates in environments like that. The turnover is high. Well, how does that affect patient care? We're going to always tie this back to quality patient care. How do nurses leaving affect quality patient care?
You have to train new ones.
You have to train new ones.
That costs a lot of money.
Costs a lot of money. So the money's going to that as opposed to equipment and new staff and more staff, and plus the lapse there.
Have a higher nurse-to-patient ratio.
You have a higher nurse-to-patient ratio, poor staffing, backfilling, all of that. Okay? And the nurses that are leaving, are they the good ones or the ones that would be okay if they left? They're the good ones. Right? That's really bad for patients. Also, the literature shows, and I have had personal experience that I'll share with you, there's less learning, less knowledge, less creativity. I worked in an environment once where the dean was very verbally abusive. And, at the time, I was young in my educator role. We were all, though, educated, worked pretty autonomously, pretty independently, and we didn't know what to do about it. We would get called in and, yelled at, threatened, being told things like, you're the worst. This is the worst faculty I've ever dealt with. Don't you know what you're doing? On and on and on. We didn't know what to do about it. What do you think we spent most of our time doing? Avoiding. We knew more ways to get out of that building without going by the dean's office than anybody would have ever. What do you think we spend most of our time talking about? The pain of it all, how we're going to deal with this, it's not right, it's not fair. At the beginning, and it didn't start right away when they were hired, they obviously didn't exhibit any of those characteristics when they were hired, but things got tough for a while. Finances were tough, NCLEX pass rates were tough, things got tough, and then this other side of her kind of really came out, and it felt like, putting us down might fix it. I don't know. Maybe we weren't working hard enough. I don't really know. But we spent a good deal of our time trying to figure out how to get around it, how to support each other, how to not be the next one on the, in the office kind of thing. What do you think our creativity about developing new ways to teach students was? We didn't have any energy left. We didn't have any time left for doing that. My most vivid memory of all this was one time leaving her office after having been chewed out royally for something that, you know, could I have done better? Sure. But is that really a way to get somebody to work better when you've been chewed out? No. Leaving her office, going by my office, picking up my materials to go teach a leadership class. I honestly had to stop, go in the bathroom, take a few minutes to regroup myself, to go into that class with energy, positive energy, enthusiasm, etc., etc. We can only do that so often. So, in retrospect, I kind of wonder if that experience unconsciously really pushed me to get involved in this whole work, so that other people don't have to really experience that. In retrospect, I feel like it was good for me to have experienced that, so I know what it's really like. So I know how you have to work together to try to get beyond that situation. So I think student satisfaction was affected then. Certainly you all. Do patients know when people aren't getting along with each other? Yeah, they can hear and see that. The Vital Smart study that I referred to earlier talked about 80% of the people said that this bullying affects 5 or more people than themselves. It's very rare that it's just a one-on-one thing that doesn't affect everybody else. So a lot of people are affected. People in this study said that it takes about 7 or more hours a week. I can testify to that. So what happens to your productivity? What happens to your ability to do what you're supposed to be doing if you're spending all this time trying to get through the bad environment? And in addition to that, all these hours that are spent cost about $8,800 per person. So you build that up, and again, it's costing money. So sometimes you need these dollars and cents things to help work within the environment to get it changed, to help people see that it's a real problem. Stress, fear, I think I've explained all that to you. It's much easier to call off sick when you're working in an environment like that. And you have more instances of headache, upset stomach, GI things. If doesn't stress affect your immune system, I'll do you the favor of not going through the pathophysiology of that. But very much, that can affect everything. So the Joint Commission in 2008, and again a couple of years later, issued a Sentinel Event Report which talked about undermining the culture of patient safety. And that's one of the major costs of disruptive behavior. They call it disruptive behavior. I think that's too nice of a word for what's really going on, but they kind of, prettied it up. They said they had evidence that it fosters medical errors, plays a role in preventable adverse outcomes, increase the cost of care, and the good people are leaving. So that's kind of what we've already talked about. Why does it still go on? In the environments that you're in or where you've experienced, why does it still go on? We know all this stuff. Why does it still happen?
Because no one intervenes.
Because what?
No one intervenes.
No one intervenes. We just stand by. We don't know what to do. No one intervenes. We let it go. Any other reasons? Why do we let it go?
Because it's probably the norm for that.
Because it may be the norm. And how hard is it to buck the norm? How hard is it to buck the head nurse? How hard is it to report a doctor who is a major, contributor to the patient volume in an organization? It's very hard. Do we all have a role in letting it continue? I suspect many of us are thinking they let it continue. I just want to drive it home. We each have a role in letting it continue. You stood up for it as a young nurse. I'll bet you anything you're still standing up against it. Yeah, sometimes. Well, that's a really good point. We'll get to that in just a second. We each have a role in how this continues, even if you're not the bully or you're not the victim. And that's something we really need to look at. Always looking at what's my role in letting this happen. Am I not saying anything? Even when I see it, am I not intervening? Am I not reporting it? Is that hard to do? Especially for most of you who are students in a sort of vulnerable position, it can very well be hard to do. The Joint Commission reported, just as you did a minute ago, that inexperienced nurses are more likely to report. You guys as new grads, you as a new nurse back in the day. Why do you think that is? Why do you think inexperienced newer nurses are more likely to report this kind of behavior?
Because they think something will happen.
They think something will happen. And have they been taught that it's wrong? And strategies to do something about it? You and I didn't have any classes like this when we were, so I'm going to assume we're in a fairly similar generation. Jeanette, did you? In your first, and hopefully maybe we did something about it when you came back, but most of us did not have, we didn't talk about this. You don't talk about it. Again, that's one of the things I'm trying to get us to. We got to talk about it. If we don't name and talk about it, we're never going to fix it. So, inexperienced nurses are still living the dream that if they say something, it's going to stop. It didn't work for you. It sort of did.
It did.
It did.
It
Good.
was okay.
Yeah, right. The patient, you did not force the
She
patient to
didn't fire
receive
me.
that.
You know, she didn't fire me.
She didn't fire you, so it did work.
It worked okay.
Yeah. You stood up for yourself. That's the biggest, and the patient. That's the biggest part of that, what you do. Inexperienced nurses haven't seen that in general, it doesn't fix everything. So more experienced nurses have seen that. They're more likely to perceive that the policies are not going to work. We still would like you new grads to take it up, to deal with it as it's supposed to be. The nurses that are already working, how do we change the cultures? How do we change the culture? Some of you said this is the culture of the unit or the department. How do we change the culture so that it doesn't continue to impact patients and staff? The Joint Commission also reported that the poor staffing levels, the long hours, stress, the constant changes can all play a factor in why this is allowed to continue. They also reported, and I think this is true, that we don't necessarily have the skills to learn to be able to address this. Either the coping skills or the conflict resolution or the communication skills. So again, that's some of what we're trying to do here. David Maxwell said exactly what you guys said. He found in his survey the bullies are not being held accountable. Nobody's taking action routinely to do something about that. People say nothing. They stay away from them. I will work very hard to avoid working with someone on a committee or on a project that I feel bullied with, or that I feel like has been very disrespectful in the past. I mean, sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. But if I have the choice, I'm going to choose not to do it. And that's not really good. I may want to work on that. My opinion the work that I do, they may lose something. You know, if any of us are not. And then who do we vent to? Who do we talk to? Co-workers? Vent at home? Do the people you live with know all the people who are bullying you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but my husband typically says, well, then do something about it. Well, I am. Anyway, and you may live with, we haven't really addressed that because our topic is workplace violence, but this is so prevalent in society, it may be going on in your own homes, and that makes it even more difficult. So how do we commonly approach it? The vast majority of people, as you all said in the Maxfield study, avoid it. Go away from it, silence. Some attack back. How does that work?
Not well.
Not well. And then what happens is you're as guilty as the other person of workplace violence, bullying, incivility. And you are not upholding the standards that you've been hired. So that doesn't work well at all. And then about a third of the people try to use dialogue. And we'll talk about how to do that. The other research that I found says we don't speak up because we don't know how, and we fear retaliation. The research that I've conducted just by doing 1 million sessions similar to this is, people tell me it takes so much time and energy, and I know that myself. And if it's not going to work, why bother? I only have a limited amount of time and energy, and if I'm going to spend it doing this, So what we really have to do then is figure out ways to deal with it, ways to speak up. So I would like for you to talk with yourself a little bit, just let everybody talk with yourself or with others. If you'd rather talk to yourself, that's fine. Talk about a situation where verbal violence or bullying has really affected patient safety and customer service. And then also, share about a time when you've gone home. How have you felt when you've been a part of that or experienced that? And what does it really do to your morale? So take a few minutes and talk about that amongst yourselves. Ready, set, go. talk. Okay, has everybody gotten a chance to share a little bit? What are some of the feelings you went home with? What are some of the feelings?
Defeated.
Defeated. What else?
Anxiety.
Anxiety.
Very anxious.
Anxious about it. You know, do you really want to come back? How's it?
Yeah.
Oh. What else?
Annoyed.
Annoyed. Is any of that good for you? Were you coming back and providing high quality patient care? No. No, not at all. So those would all be areas that, are evidence for us that it really needs to continue. So we're going to talk about strategies now. The number one most important strategy is to be able to recognize and identify when verbal violence, abuse, incivility, whatever word you want to use, is going on. And we were just talking about it in the back of the room there. Until we talk about it, until we name it, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. Until we name it as not according to standards. Not what a professional ought to be doing. So some of the overt behavior is a little bit easier to see and to call. People are calling you names, they're yelling at you, they're putting you down, they're calling you stupid. Constantly, you're not doing it good enough, etc., etc. You all can identify that, right? Some of the things that are a little bit harder to identify and actually document, which is part of what we need to do, is when people withhold information from you. Say a report in the morning as a part of the retaliation because you reported them or you talked to them. They may withhold important information. Supervisors may withhold information. Actual retaliation, what could the retaliation look like? How can people actually retaliate before they get to slitting your tires? I mean, do that, but...
Being passive.
Being passive, so not sharing things with you. Is that kind of what you mean by being passive, or not speaking up, or...
Saying things that have an underlying meaning to what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Okay, a tone.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? How else could people retaliate?
Spread rumors.
Spread rumors, gossip, put you down. We'll look at that in just a minute. Give you really hard work assignments, not help you. Can any of us take care of the patients we're taking care of without help from other people? No. Very slow to respond when you call for help. Rolling eyes, heavy sighing. I think women are very good at this. When someone walks away from you and they're rolling their eyes at you, can you tell? In the back of their head, somehow? Can't you tell? My 6-year-old granddaughter said to me the other day, I had obviously displeased her in some way, shape, or form. I don't remember what. But she walked away from me and, she just had a toot about her. And I said, Jamie, don't you be rolling your eyes at me. She turned around and said, Grandma, how'd you know I was doing that? I said, it's just a grandma thing, Jamie. But I think, and I always wondered how my mom knew. How she'd call me out. You just know. The shoulders are going, there's kind of... You know when people are being disrespectful to you, even when they think it's inside. Unreasonable assignments, not socializing. They don't invite you to go out to lunch, to go to lunch with them, or go out on Friday nights or whatever. The silent treatment. There may be some, Jill, what you're talking about with passive, the silent treatment. They won't help you, they won't talk to you. And then not speaking up, not sharing what's going on. Any other ways that you've seen disrespectful, disruptive behavior exhibited? David Maxfield says that there's 3 kind of ways. The personal attack, again, that's kind of obvious. The intimidation. Erosion of professional competence, like the gossiping. Putting you down, putting down what you're doing, putting down your education. And then through the work that you're assigned. Maybe not providing the help that you need. Have you ever had a day when it seems like you keep getting all the really hard patients? And all the patients are kind of hard to take care of now, for sure. But that could definitely be part of, the assignments or the retaliation that's going on. So these are some of the examples that you see in the literature. I think we've hit most of those. Unwarranted, invalid criticism, I think that happens a lot. Blame, unequal treatment, exclusion, humiliation. I mean, some of you said that that's how you felt when it was going on. I don't know what's going on here. It starts all of a sudden and it goes away. In the research that David Maxfield did, he found these 4 major examples of how workplace violence increases, what kind of causes it. This sort of gets at the causes. Major organizational change. Are any of you not going through organizational change? Healthcare, education, even graduation is a major change. Changing from clinical sites to clinical sites for some of the students. Those can all increase the stress, right? And tend to contribute to more bullying. Worker characteristics. There's all different kind of characteristics within the workplace. Different ages, different generations, genders, backgrounds, preparation. all those things can really contribute to a little bit of differences and may increase the stress. And if bullying is allowed to go on in your organization, that could certainly be some of the results of that. Relationships. They say that relationships with your colleagues and with your supervisor are the major reasons people tend to leave an organization or leave that unit. So if you don't have good, productive, collaborative relationships, that can certainly be a factor. And then the systems that you're working within. What are the policies like? Do people know the policies? Are we following the policies? What are the standards of behavior? Do you have standards of behavior? Blessing Hospital does for sure. I know in talking with the groups yesterday, Western does, has a code of conduct, John Wood does, Blessing Agreement does. You have to have standards of behavior if you're going to expect people to work well together. Now, in a way that's a sad commentary, but it's still what it is. We used to think you were raised to know how to treat each other. Have you ever heard of the book, I learned everything I need to learn in kindergarten? Well, even if you didn't go to kindergarten, that's, sort of how we used to think of it. So those can be all kinds of factors that contribute to the bullying. Just to remind you that sometimes it's the more passive behaviors that can have the biggest detrimental, damaging effects, and they're more pervasive because it's hard to identify them. It's hard to document, it's hard to prove. When somebody's yelling at you, that's pretty documentable, pretty observable. When they're just sort of not speaking to you or not helping you out, that's a little bit harder to do. So Maxfield in his work, along with the Crucial Conversations people, came up with 4 pillars of accountability. 4 ways that we really need to make sure are working well in the workplace, in the school, in your organization, to try to eliminate bullying. First one is individual, personal accountability. We already saw what the research shows that most people do. They walk away, they don't speak up, they don't say anything. We need to reverse that so that we speak up when we're being attacked, when we're being disrespected. And we'll talk about ways to do that in a minute. We need to be educated about that. Some people it may come more naturally to. Other people may really need to learn and practice it. Peer accountability. We need to get over this culture of silence, this permissiveness that goes on when we just allow it to continue. So how do we help our colleagues speak up? Because maybe when you're the victim at the moment, you really can't think of what to say. How can your colleagues who are around you? Instead, what do colleagues do now? They run. They leave. Honestly, for a while in the situation I was talking to you about earlier, that's what we did. Oh, good, it's not me this week. Well, we finally got to think, wait a minute. We're stronger together than we are as individuals. How do we group together and work on this as a group? Supervisors. Supervisors, teachers need to hold to the policies, speak up, do something about it when it's reported to them. One of the earlier studies that the Vital Smarts group did showed that less than 30% of managers actually take action when verbal violence or bullying or disrespect is reported to them. We need those skills also and need to be held accountable to doing something about it. And staff reported that's why they didn't report it. Why bother? If nothing's going to be done. In the old days, we used to say things like, well, that's just her. That's just how they act. They're a really good nurse. There's nothing we can really do about it. We have changed those standards considerably. The culture hasn't always changed, but the standards of what's expected have definitely changed. In our place and in most organizations, supervisors, managers, faculty are expected to do something. To actually work with the employee to change that kind of behavior. And then for the whole system, you need to have human resource policies and procedures that support reporting it and helping people and teaching people what to do with it. You need all 4 of these to be working well if we're actually going to do away with this culture of verbal violence and bullying. So you might want to look in your organization, in your unit, in your class, in your school, and see how are we doing in each one of those areas, and really work on some ways to improve those. So, David Maxfield came up with several, 6 different things to do to actually handle the bully, and that's what we're going to talk about. First, number 1 thing, and remember I said this earlier, you got to start with yourself. You need to ask yourself, what role am I playing in this bullying, verbal violence, and civility? That's really hard because you feel like a victim, right? As long as you let it keep going, it's going to keep going. People will tend to continue to bully others as long as it works for them. That is a principle of psychology. We will keep behaving the same way as long as it's working. Your job is to make it quit working, at least for you. I have an example of that I want to share with you that I've been sharing in the different sessions, and usually is fairly stunning. Back in the old days, 10 years ago or so, I used to teach the senior first semester Advanced Concepts course, the Advanced Patho 402 course. And unfortunately, some students would not pass that course. I had a student once who didn't pass the course who came in to talk to me about what her grade was and how was I going to change it. Well, I don't usually change grades. As a matter of fact, I really never have. Because before a teacher ever fails a student, they have calculated and recalculated those grades about 100 million times, wouldn't you say? So, you know, it's not really a calculation error. So anyway, she came in to talk with me about it. The conversation went pretty well for a while. We went over her test, we went over the points, we went over, and it was going okay for a while, and then she realized that I wasn't going to pass her. She started yelling and screaming at me. And I could hear outside. Our offices are in such a place where people can pretty much hear if there's a violent episode going on in an office. And I could hear faculty sort of out there, and that helped me feel a little bit safer about the whole thing. And I tried to, talk her down, tried to use some of the strategies that I'm going to share with you here, and it wasn't working. She just got more irate, more irate. So I stood up and escorted her out of the office. And she went out yelling and screaming, carried on out in the parking lot to the point where the secretary who was up front came back and said, "What went on? What did you do?" I mean, she was kidding. "What did you do to that student?" And I said, "We just couldn't agree on a grade," and kind of let it go. So, okay, that's over. I'm sort of settling back down again. Next semester, she was in my leadership course that I taught, and that was back in the days for you seniors where we used to allow students to continue on into leadership even if they hadn't passed the previous semester. And anyway, I'm doing a similar class like this, talking about communication, talking about bullying, aggressive behavior, and I made the same kind of statement. We tend to continue using the same behavior until it doesn't work for us. So aggressiveness, violence, it's up to each one of us to stop it. And I will never forget, I was over there in classroom 114, she was in sort of the back right of the room, and she stood up, and I'm like taking a deep breath, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? And she starts going like this at me, and I'm up in the front of the room, thank God. She said, "You are the first person ever that didn't work on." I said, "Oh, tell me more." Yeah, I'm just trying to take a deep breath here. "Tell me more." She said, "I have always been able to get what I want from my husband, from my father, by just yelling and screaming and stomping my feet." And I wanted to say to the class, point proven, but I thought that might be a little rude. So I said, "And what led it to not work with me? You wouldn't change. I couldn't get you to change, so I finally had to stop." But anyway, I just really thought that is the most obvious example I have ever been able to think of, or one that just kind of happened, of how this is true. Wouldn't you say that about the people around you? They're going to keep on behaving the way they're behaving as long as it works. So your job is to make it not work anymore, at least for you. So you need to change from thinking, each of us, we tend to think about all the things that could go bad if I step up. They're going to retaliate, I'm going to get fired, I'm not going to have a job, they're going to hate me, they're not going to help me. What we need to do is change our thinking, and that's always the first thing that has to happen before you change your actions. We're always working on our actions. What we don't realize is you got to change your thinking first. So we need to change our thinking to imagine what would happen if I don't speak up. This behavior is going to continue. And most what we have learned about chronic bullying is that bullying is all about their own feelings of self-esteem. It has very little to do with the person that they're ranting and raving at. And yet that's who we think it has to do with, right? Oh, I must not be good enough, I must not know what I'm doing, etc., etc. It has everything to do with their own self-esteem. So we need to realize that and understand if we don't speak up, it's going to continue. And it's going to affect patient care. That's what I want to keep getting us to. So we have to speak up. We have to, move on from this silent permission. We have to do it right. We'll talk about how to do that. And so to speak up, you're going to start with the facts. When you yelled at me, when you called me stupid, when you put me down, whatever, I don't know exactly what your experiences are. We don't want to use judgmental or provocative words. We want to speak in a calm voice. We don't want to say, you never appreciate what I do. We don't want to start with the last 30 years of bad behavior. Us female spouses have a way of doing that. And most males will agree with that 100%. Just stay in right now. Today, when you yelled at me. Don't say you always yell at me. Don't say you never help me. Just stay in the right now. Because that's all you can really deal with. What happens when you come across attacking like that? What does it do to the conversation? Shuts it down. Because the other person gets defensive, or they're going to attack back, or now you're in an escalating thing. And it didn't work, so I'm not going to do it again. Well, that's because we didn't use maybe the best strategies. So speak calmly, put the patient first, always focus on how this affects patient care or student engagement or whatever, the bigger picture. Just this one time. And if there's been a pattern of it, choose the right thing to talk about. The fact that you yelled at me. The fact that you called me stupid. That's what you're talking about. A lot of times we kind of choose the easiest thing and we never get to the main point. So this is the way I would suggest that you actually say this. There are 100 different ways to do this. I try to keep it very simple because the stress, the emotions, can carry you away. So, say for example, somebody said to me, you certainly are not very caring. When you didn't help me this morning, that was very uncaring of you. So we want to use the three-part sentence there. Now accused is sort of an inflammatory word. If I had to retype this, I would probably say, when you said I wasn't caring. Okay? So, and I wrote that, I'm not criticizing anybody else. When you said I wasn't caring. So you say the behavior. When you said I wasn't caring, you try to use the words that they used. I felt betrayed. I felt humiliated. I felt whatever it is you feel, the emotion of it. Because, and this is where you're really going to try to go to the big picture, I believe we both want the patient to be comfortable. I believe we both really care about quality patient care. That's where you really want to elevate it to the common mission, the common purpose that we both have. And then you're going to ask them to quit doing it. I expect you to be respectful of me. I would appreciate it if you did not disrespect me. Something like that. That's it. Now, do you suppose they're going to say, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't need to say that? Sometimes that may happen. Your real goal is to get it to stop happening. Don't expect an apology. If it happens, that's great. But even if you don't get an apology, your goal is to get it to stop happening, to speak up, to stand up for yourself or the other person. What happens if not only do they not apologize, they say, who in the heck are you to talk to me like that? Who died and left you king? So what are you going to do next? What do you want to do next? Argue back? Come more? Sometimes, or run away. See, it didn't work. They told me how to do this and it doesn't work. You want to respond in the same calm, cool, collective way. I'm a nurse here who wants to do the best patient care. And I do care, and I would appreciate it if you didn't call me uncaring again. That's kind of called broken records. You restate it, but you stay cool, calm, and you don't put any tone in your voice. That's the hard part. That's the really hard part. How about any of you been yelled at for not being able to help a patient, help another nurse turn a patient, or PCAs tell me this all the time. They're always yelling at me. I can never get there fast enough because I only have 20 other things I'm supposed to be doing. So you might deal with that. The actual behavior. When you yell at me for not getting here quickly to help, how might you feel? Hurt? Unappreciated? Angry? Not valued? Whatever it is you feel. There's no wrong answer to that what you feel thing. That's your emotion. I feel hurt because I tried my best to help you. Didn't you? I know the patient. I'm trying. I tried to get there. Don't make 100 excuses. Don't be blaming everybody else. Just keep it short and sweet and simple. And I expect you to talk nicely to me. I expect you not to yell at me. Always state what it is you expect. Nicely, calmly. So that's one thing. Other assertive techniques. The broken record is what I just shared with you, if the person kind of attacked you back. Stay there. Now after 2 or 3 times, I would generally say, well, I can see we're not going to get through on this, and kind of walk away. But I would certainly try that first. Sometimes you need to take a break. Sometimes you need to get your emotions under control. You need to take a couple deep breaths. Like I talked about going from the dean's office over to teach a class. I said to kind of settle myself down. So you may need to do that. Take a breath, take a pause before speaking. It may need to be a longer break. If you're very emotional about this, you may need to talk to them later about it. The problem is sometimes when we put it off like that, we don't do it. And then we're silent and we're kind of letting it go on. The next step is to validate the bully's true concerns. This may be the really hard part. Try to find something that you can agree with so that you two can get on the same page about something. So say that somebody didn't really come to help as quickly as they wanted. Aren't you frustrated when that happens? So can't you maybe understand their frustration? I'm not saying the yelling is good, but can't you understand somebody's frustration when there's nobody around to help? So that's where you validate their true concerns. I hear that you're frustrated because there was no one there to help you turn the patient. That would really frustrate me too. Now, do you think you're more on the, communicating, understanding each other? I still would prefer, you wouldn't say still, I know my tone's getting in there. I would prefer that you not yell at me. I think we'll be able to work together better if we can just talk about it. Does that make sense? What does that take for you to actually talk like that to somebody who just screamed at you? Self-control? Thinking? Huh? Practice? Exactly. So this is hard work. I'm not denying this is hard work. Students, as you learn the nursing skills, didn't you have to work and practice and study? I am telling you, learning these kind of communication skills is way more work than learning how to give an injection or learning how to do a care plan. And okay, you may not be receiving a grade for it, but honestly you are receiving grades for it in terms of how well you're getting along with the people you're working with, how well you're standing up for yourself, how well you're being a leader and communicating well. So find something you can agree with. Joseph Grenny, one of the authors of Crucial Conversations, says, to acknowledge mutual purpose, the whole thought of I want what you want. Even though it may not appear that way, I want us to work together well. I want us to give quality patient care well. Do you see what I mean, kind of trying to get to that higher purpose? The next thing is clarify the natural consequences of their behavior. Show them that bullying won't work. Not by bullying back, or yelling or arguing, or reporting them. Reporting them up, if you have the authority to discipline or punish, those really ought to be last resorts. Are they okay? Yes. But let's not go there first. How does that make a person feel? Well, I'm going to report you. Well, now what have you done? Haven't you broken off the communication there a little bit? So let's try to work at it in and amongst ourselves. I'm not saying you can't report it up. I'm not saying you don't write up an incident report and everything. But let's maybe not have that the first thing you do. So how is it bad for them? When you yell at me in front of others, I really don't want to work closely with you. And this could really affect our patients. It's really hard. I mean, who would want to work with somebody who's yelling at you or putting you down or calling you stupid? And I'm not saying they use the word stupid, although that happens. But you know when somebody is putting you down. So try to get at that actual behavior and say that. Seek mutual purpose, quality patient care. Some people say, well, you really can't reason with a bully. Well, during the bullying, it's pretty hard to do that. That's why you really got to de-escalate it. But if the truth be known, haven't all of us at some time or another disrespected another person? Maybe even bullied because we want our own way. Don't we sometimes want our own way? We want it now. Most of us have learned how to curtail that and only act that way in the car by ourselves. Hopefully not have road rage or anything, but every once in a while we forget because of the stresses you're under. And aren't you all, didn't we already talk about you all being reasonable people? All of us who can reason with. So I would say that you can reason with people, no matter if they're acting like a bully or not. Do bullies see themselves as bullies? Because that's bad. We don't healthcare seems bad. So we really still need to work with and talk this way with people. And we already talked about oftentimes this behavior will increase with stress. Then you need to set boundaries. That's the part where you set expectations. I would appreciate it if you didn't yell at me anymore. I would appreciate if you talk nicely. So you set what you expect them. Let them know what the next step will be if this behavior continues. So if it's the third or fourth time you talk to them, or even the second or third, you may very well say, I am really going to need to talk to our manager or our teacher about this so we can try to resolve this issue. Because our goal for all of us, and the standards of behavior for all of us are that we work well together. And then document. Maxfield studies showed that only 51% of people knew that HR had policies about this. And only 7% knew of people who used them. Well, we've got policies and standards and procedures. We really need to know them and follow them. So I think these are things that we've talked about. Keep documentation, keep records of when. I had some students talk to me the other day about an issue, it wasn't here, about an issue with a faculty member. And I said, do you have notes? Do you have records? Have you documented? And they said yes. I said, then you need to use that as you go talk in the ways that we've talked about, either to her or to her supervisor. I do want to mention, and you heard in the introduction that I do a great deal of work on scope and standards. I do want to mention to you all that everything that I've talked about here in terms of what the standards of behavior are not just isolated to your school or your institution or just because I say that's how it ought to be. The American Nurses Association, who sets the scope and standards of our practice, has standards that say we must report, talk about, take appropriate action for inappropriate behavior. That is our responsibility. We must speak up when it's appropriate if the health care is not being done appropriately. And we already talked about this affects patient safety, so this is very much a health care issue. And the communication standard has competencies that we must assess our own communication skills, continuing to learn and grow. Seek continuous improvement of that. The leadership standard applies to all of us, not just people with named managerial positions. The leadership standard competencies say we treat colleagues with respect, trust, and dignity. Do you get my point? These are national standards that we are accountable to. Not just because one place says we've got to be nice to each other. There are additional standards for nurse leaders. In the new, this hasn't been adopted yet. This was a draft of the newly being developed standards for administrators. But in there it says that they must develop healthy work environments. That those environments are ones that are safe, empowering, and satisfying. They promote ongoing education and evaluation of communication skills. So those of you in administrative positions or aspiring to those would really need to look at that. Then the Code of Ethics was strengthened. The new code, which just came out in a couple months ago, really strengthened the fact 6.2, provision 6.2, that we are accountable for having environments that show respect, peer support, open identification of difficult issues. Is not workplace violence and bullying a difficult issue, and we need to really talk about it. And then an additional standard there for nurse executives. So many of us use the crucial conversation literature to talk about this, and very briefly, getting unstuck is identifying your own role. What's my part in this? Starting with heart, what's my motivation when I'm going to talk to the other person? Now, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes it's really to slam them. Put them down. Let them know what I think. Well, let's look at what is our mission, what is our purpose in really doing that. Learning to look for signs of silence and violence when people are going either way. Making it safe. That's why I asked you not to be attacking in your discussion with them. Try to get all those inflammatory words out. Because if it's not safe for them to respond, it's just going to escalate. Mastering your stories. A lot of times when someone has treated us poorly, we develop these big, long stories about why they're doing that. They hate me, I'm no good, you know, etc., etc. That doesn't really help. You just want to stay with the facts. And that's what the State My Path is. That's using the state skills, which are start with the facts, talk tentatively. By that I just mean keep it even, keep it open, ask for the other person's viewpoint on it, you know, get their commitment. Then move to action. What's the action that you're going to take? I think we talked about most of these. I would say, in general, nurses together get a lot more done. So working through your professional organizations, you can see what the policies are. The military nurses are the ones, are any of you been from the military or, okay. They're the ones who identified first within ANA about 15 years ago the horrible workplace violence and incivility that goes on in the military. And if you think it's hard for you to say something, when you have that hierarchical structure, so we worked with them, and I worked with several of the, I don't remember what their rank was, because we just called them by the first name, because I wasn't in the military. I didn't have to call them anything else. Anyway, worked with several of their officers in the policies that they were trying to develop. And they really, like I said, I really admire them, because I think it's even harder for them to bring this up and to talk about it. And they really helped us at the national level start to generate work for all nurses. We do here at Blessing have these policies here. I think it's important people know what their policies are, so you need to look at them for yourself. So let's practice a couple of things. We've already kind of done the nurse yells at you thing. I talked with some students in the past couple of weeks to try to get, because I knew most of the people in the audience were going to be students, but I think everybody can apply these to them, to try to get some idea of what issues of verbal violence and bullying they've experienced. And I will tell you, I don't know if it's just because they were talking to me or not, but it really took them a little while to think about this. You know, I was really kind of scared about it. How many things are going to just pop out of their mouth? How bad are we really? You know, I'm sure we have opportunities to improve. But one of the students told me they felt like a teacher yelled at them and disrespected them in public on clinical because I didn't know what the medication did. First step, is that verbal violence or incivility? Teacher yelled at you in public. Yes. Okay? So first we have to identify that it is. Then using that three-part statement, how might you talk to the teacher? When you yell at me, I feel disrespected, hurt, angry. Because, now think of the bigger picture here. What's supposed to be going on in a clinical environment between a teacher and a student? Learning. Yeah. Because when you yell at me, I'm having a hard time learning. I'm having a hard time listening. The students yesterday, I think it was the Western students, said, because I knew the other 56 drugs, I just didn't know the 57. Yeah. Isn't that true? So anyway, yeah, you might say that, but it might be nicer. Focus on the bigger picture. So I would like it if you would not yell at me in public. I very much would like to learn these meds. I really do. You don't want to list a whole list of excuses, how many hours you stayed up doing it. I know you all did that. But is that something you could do? I know you could do it. Is that something all of us could do? Think about, if you talk respectfully, now you may want to do it right there at the med card, although probably you're too shook up. Yeah, right, for doing that. But do you think that the teacher, if you've made some other mistakes, is going to want to talk to you? And are you going to want to talk to them? Yes. So you may want to prepare. You may want to ask a buddy to kind of help you prepare how to do this. A student told me that as a sophomore, sitting in the library, and I forget exactly what was going on, but seniors said to her how stupid she was because she didn't know how to take a blood pressure. Is that verbal violence, bullying, incivility? Absolutely. What could you say to the senior student who did that? When you... What did the student say to them? Call me stupid. When you call me stupid, I feel... Yeah, maybe another word. But I get you.
Humiliated.
Humiliated. Put down. Because... Why? Bigger picture because. Higher purpose. I'm in the process of learning. And it's really hard for me to learn when somebody calls me stupid. I would like it if you would not call me stupid and help me. Really? Yeah. Some of the students yesterday said, because, don't you remember when you were a sophomore? And that's kind of what you want to say, right? Now, doesn't that inflame the situation, though? So, you kind of hold that back if you could. Does that make sense to you? How about a nurse on the unit? This was one of the examples they told me about. How about a nurse on the unit puts down a senior nursing student in front of other students for not being able to lead the team effectively? They told me this happened in January. which is the beginning of their experience. What could that student say? When you put me down. Now they couldn't really come up with the exact behavior, so if you can come up, that's our interpretation of the behavior. If you could say exactly what they did, that would be helpful, without getting all antagonistic about it. But for right now, when you put me down in front of other students, I feel incompetent. Insulted, did you say? Whatever it is you feel, there's no wrong answer to that part. Because, what's the bigger purpose here? Because why? Because what?
Because I'm learning and I need your leadership.
Because I'm learning and I'd like you to help me learn. Same thing. Because I really want to learn how to do this and I'm here to learn. What students would like to say is, I'm just starting out here. Can't you give me a break? Now that would be that's what we'd all like to say. That would be kind of inflammatory. Nurses told me yesterday in the audience, and I know this is true, when they were senior students, they were running the hospital. And that's true in years gone by. It isn't true today. So sometimes that's where they're coming from. The other thing you might do at some point if it continues on is try to find something you can agree with. Try to find something to help them see you understand. It's not right, it's not an excuse, but you might, if it continues or whatever, say, I can understand that you're frustrated because you have a lot to do. And, I'm asking you more questions and you're trying to help me and you'd probably like it if I could do all this myself. And honestly, most of the time they'll say, oh, I know, I'm sorry, I'm really busy. This is the 5th student I've had this week. Well, they need a break. I mean, honestly. Okay, so at the end of that, I would like for you to help me. I would like for you to not put me down. Does that make sense? I would strongly suggest to you that if you have situations that come up more often than not, write yourself some notes on how you want to deal with that. Practice how you want to say it. Because like I said earlier, it's a skill, not unlike all your other skills, but these psychosocial skills are much harder, communication skills, much harder to unlearn ways you've been doing them, to learn new ones, than it is to learn how to give a shot or to give meds. How about a physician situation? Have any of you been yelled at by a physician when you called? Is that verbal violence, incivility, bullying? Absolutely. So you've called a physician, and you're telling them about the lab values on this patient, and they start swearing at you and making nasty statements about your ethnicity or your intelligence or whatever. What could you say to that physician? Now he's going to have to take a breath at some point, okay? What could you say to that physician? When you yell at me, I feel... Now try in this situation not to use tearful or crying or... Yeah, don't... Yeah, you may feel that way, but that's not really going to be too helpful here.
I'm kind of bumped up on that.
I feel...
Belittled.
Belittled, put down, disrespected. Disrespected covers a lot of ground. And it's not like a, oh, poor me kind of thing. I feel disrespected because, what's the bigger purpose here? What are we all caring about? Patient care. I'm calling you with this lab report because we both care about quality care for this patient. Something like that. I would appreciate it if you didn't yell at me anymore. So then typically, I would hold the phone out while they yell again. Do not slam the phone down. Do not yell back. Because why? You're just acting the same way. You're just as guilty as them then for not following the standards. I know you may want to. I just hold the phone out, let them go. I'm telling you, when I used to have students on the floor, when I was working up in ICU here, they'd see me like this. Oh, he's at it again. Or, and I mean, I don't have to have it to my ear to hear it. I can hear it fine. Okay, they take a breath because they're going to have to take a breath at some point. Dr. Smith, I'm just making up a name. Dr. Smith, I really would like us to work together on quality care for this patient. I'd appreciate it if you didn't yell at me, and here's what I need for your patient. And then you still may have to do this. Or you may. It won't last very long. If you don't take it, it won't keep happening. Now they may go someplace else, but then you act as a bystander and help the other person. Okay? There have been times after 2 or 3 times when I have hung up the phone. I will tell you about it. I didn't slam it, and I didn't get into much trouble. Now, we also need to look at system issues in that particular situation where we're not calling them 15 times during the night. You know, so, and I know that the organization has done things like that. So, you know, I think we've done our part in that. What are some examples you have or some issues you've had that you'd like some help in how to resolve? Or what to say or how to do?
Yeah, I have a coworker that comes to me a lot and complains about other people.
Okay.
And so it's just knowing.
Is that breaking the standards? Is gossiping about other people helpful to the environment? Is that verbal violence, incivility, bullying? Yes. Okay. So we would use the same exact process. When you come and talk to me about other people, I feel, how do you feel?
Yeah, you're like trapped. You feel trapped.
Yeah, I feel trapped.
You know, I want to tell her, you know, let's take it to the
Correct.
source, you know.
I feel like now we're both not following the standards.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like, sometimes people are like, what are you talking about me to other people? What do you say? You know. So I feel trapped. I feel hurt. Because we both know that gossiping about other people is not good for the work environment. And it's a violation of our eye care standards. It is exactly. It says right there, do not gossip or something like that. I would appreciate it if you would, and you know, people get so tired here and take the mail to the right address. I would appreciate it if you would talk to the other person about this. And I'm going to tell you that I'm not going to participate in this kind of discussion anymore. Because I feel so strongly that it's not good for the environment, for the workplace if we do that. Well, who died made you king? You gossip too. Well, yeah, sometimes I do. I'm sorry. I would appreciate, you know, let me know if you see me gossiping. I really don't want to do that. I really don't want to be that way. Well, what are they going to say to that? Would that help? Would that write yourself that out? Now you're not going to read it off the paper when you're talking about it, but do you know it's going to happen again? Yeah. Somebody over here, Jeanette, did you have a comment?
Most of your examples have dealt with face-to-face communication.
Thank you.
In our setting, in home care, our staff are out working in the field, and I see it more in electronic communication, subtleties in
Cyberbullying.
email and so forth,
Yeah.
putting each other down.
Right. Deal with it exactly the same way. Name it as incivility. Name it as verbal violence or bullying. Whatever word works for you. Name it. Hold people to the standards. And is it your staff then who are doing this?
And they copy everybody.
Oh, of course. Personally, I would not deal with it in an email.
Yeah.
I would deal with it face to face.
And some staff speak up and recognize
Yes,
it.
exactly.
You know, I didn't
Some do.
appreciate your,
And then as the supervisor, your job there is to commend them for doing that. You know, reinforce what the good behavior is. But I would deal with that in exactly the same ways.
I didn't even mention, I'm trying to follow the eye care standards.
Oh, yeah. But they're so unreal. Yeah. So I would hold them to the same standards. And email and social media is even that much worse because you can't interpret the tone. You don't know what the situation really is. You don't know where the person's coming from. At least when you're talking face to face, if the tone is real kind and nice, you may not put all that bad stuff to it. But when we read emails like that, don't we put a tone to it? Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? The back of your handout, you have several pages, probably more than you ever would have needed, of references and resources to help you. I wanted to make sure you had some resources to go look at, to bring to your organization. The 2 final ones on the last page are 2 websites, toolkits. They're really good. There's a lot out there. You do not have to start from scratch. There's a lot out there that can help you in your organization to put together policies and how to do it. Key among them is we need to educate people. We need to name it what it is and not keep being silent about it so that it keeps going on. Any other questions or thoughts or concerns? Thank you very much. You have an evaluation tool if you would fill it out.